Okay, welcome to our last discussion on lighting. We will be revisiting lighting throughout the remaining portion of the class, but the primary focus after today is going to shift to materials. We'll be working on materials for a couple of lectures, a couple of labs, and we're going to start working on texturing. Chipping away little by little and trying to give you some of the basic tools that you can use for texturing. Now, there's one thing you guys should realize, that even though your lighting may be finished in the diffuse part, as soon as you add materials, we usually need to go back in and tweak the lighting. And then when we add textures, we're going to go back and tweak the lighting again. So while lighting is, for the most part, going to be finalized before you start working on materials, there are going to be adjustments you need to make. So today we're going to be doing exterior, daytime, and nighttime. The exterior, daytime, is a much simpler lighting scheme. We have one light that we use, which is what? Sun. And then we use an IBL, image-based lighting with an HDR image in it, which we supply for you guys. The nighttime scene, a little more complicated, but still very familiar because it uses the same 4-point light scheme that we had in the interior. Okay, the lion's share of the lighting is going to come from these little LED bulbs that are in the candle. This you will be finding an HDR image for. By find, I mean we give you the link and you have to go and download it. The only reason you have to do that is because the nighttime version of the HDR that we're going to be using, well, to be honest, we don't have any nighttime HDR images in our library. So I had to go find one that was decent, that we could get good results with, that was free, royalty-free. You guys could use it for study purposes. So I'm going to send you to the website. You guys are going to download that, and that's what we're going to be plugging into here. It also gives you a chance to try out the spherical mapping feature in the IBL, because the HDR image is going to be a big, giant, rectangular image. All right, anytime, any questions, please feel free, ask away. All right, no open labs, probably not until next month when everything's settled. All right, so office hours, basically 10 to 4 on Tuesdays and Thursdays. I can have, I can meet with you other times by appointment. Depends on what I have going on. A reminder, please do not upload any assignments once the deadline is passed. If you upload it and I don't get notified, it won't get graded. Okay, so you need to actually complete the activity for it to be graded. So just send me a message if you've forgotten, or if you just want to upload it to prove that it was there. That's fine, but I still need you to go back in when I give you the extension to upload it and complete the activity. And there really is no need to upload it in a panic, because we will go by the timestamp of your target template that you give us. Right, so if it's late and we don't get to it for whatever reason, when you finally do upload it, we're going to go by the timestamp, so don't worry. But ask for an extension. I want to make sure no activities are missed, because remember, each one of these is also going to count towards your integrative learning hour. So make sure you're turning stuff in. And that's why I want to make sure you complete the activity. All right, any questions about that? Please ask away. Okay. All right, so exterior lighting. Today we're going to be learning how to adjust the IBL to make it actually give final gathering more power. So before we made it look brighter to the camera, now we're actually going to make it brighter when we render. All right, a little bit of daytime versus nighttime. We're going to be going over the hypershade, introduction to the hypershade, because that is going to be our primary material editor, and it's going to be a way that we navigate through networks, shading networks, where we start creating different looks, we start adding maps to it. Okay, so two pictures here at Full Sail. This one is out in the Zen Garden, 10:30. This one is outside of 4B, like 1:30, 2 o'clock. The shadow length is sort of similar. The shadow softness is also similar too. This is actual sunlight. Right, so this is going to be kind of your guide for how soft your shadows should be. Right, because there is a tendency, especially in our minds, we tend to think of shadows as being super soft from the sun. Generally, they're not. They're not that super soft. Maybe at the dawn or end of the day, at dusk, when the sun is really low, not much light getting through the horizon, right? Maybe the shadows blur out a lot more, but for the most part, whenever there is visible sun and we have nice visible shadows, they're not going to be super soft. All right, it's also going to be able to give us time of day also. Remember, if the sun is directly overhead, we're going to have what kind of shadows? Small shadows, right? They're going to be directly under the subject. So as the sun sets or rises, the shadows are going to be longer. Time of year makes a little bit of a difference too. Because time of year is, how the sun orbits around the earth. So shadows come from different directions based on the time of the year. Slightly different directions. Sun is still going to rise in the east, set in the west, but there is going to be some shift. Okay, so here's an example. This is Owen. He used to teach visual effects. We went outside and we decided to see what we could do with available light. And the available light we used was sun. The sky was our fill light. And then we used a reflector. All right, so we used the sun as a backlight merely to kind of separate the subject from the background better. And also, another thing about the sun, if your subject is looking directly into the sun, what happens? You squint. You get, sour lemon face. So you want to try to avoid that. If you guys are shooting images or you're thinking about taking vacation pictures, try not shooting into the sun. Try getting your subject to, don't have your subject look into the sun. And be careful if you shoot into the sun too, because if the sun is visible in your lens, you get stuff called lens flares, and you get all kinds of, glass lens effects and artifacting that you may not want. All right, so we did add a little bounce card merely to illuminate the face a little bit better. But you can usually get away during the day with just natural available light. All right, exterior light toward the night or early in the morning. Light levels are low. If you have low light levels, what happens to your colors? Yes, they desaturate naturally. Okay, so a lot of times in CG, we may not get that real desaturation that we want. Okay, so that's one other thing when we start getting into materials and textures that you may have to compensate for. Right, that real rich, vibrant red that you had during the day looks great, but at night you don't want it sticking out. So you may have to mute it and or desaturate it. And we'll show you some ways to do that in Maya and also in Photoshop. Photoshop very simple. You can do that with pretty much any image you get. And another problem, and I'm just sort of giving you guys a forewarning, another issue you're going to run into when you start working with textures are, you're going to be pulling stuff off the internet. Most likely, what's the image format? Probably JPEG, right? JPEGs can be artifacty, which means they have compression in them. You guys know how JPEG compression works? Anybody? Okay. So imagine you have an image. For example, here. We'll use this as an example. So when you go to compress a JPEG, I'm sure you guys have all seen different levels of compression you can do, especially in Photoshop. You can go small, medium, large. All right. The more you compress the file, the more you are discarding information. And JPEGs work like this. They read the image as far as color and value, and similar values and similar colors are categorized, and some of them are discarded. And what they do is, and that would be the compression. You're removing pixels, so you're making the file size smaller. When it uncompresses, the image viewer or whatever it is that can read a JPEG format will open it up and it will rebuild the missing pixels based on the surrounding pixels. Does that make sense? So it throws some pixels out. When you open it up, it'll rebuild those pixels based on what's around it. Right now, that's all fine and well if you really don't need super high quality. But when you start discarding a lot of pixels, you run into what's called banding, which means you'll see distinct places where one color should look smooth when it goes into another color, but it doesn't. You'll also notice some graininess, or what they call artifacting, where you'll be able to actually see pixels that look a little off if you zoom in to pixel level and take a look. All right, now, the reason I'm mentioning that is because when you guys start pulling stuff off the internet, you want to make sure you find the largest possible image, and when you start working on it, the first thing you're going to do is change it into a Photoshop format. Photoshop PSD format. Why would you want to do that? No compression. Anything Photoshop compresses, Photoshop can uncompress. It can recreate it accurately. Photoshop is a real image manipulation program. It is designed to handle images. Yes, they've added a lot of other crap to it over the years, like animation, and you can do cells and ghosting on it if you wanted to. But its primary function, its paycheck, if you will, comes from being able to handle an image accurately. As accurate as possible. And in the industry, Photoshop is still pretty much the industry standard for what you're going to be using. Okay, so the reason I mention that is, again, artifacting, image format, file compression, those are all things you're going to start to look to when you look for texturing images. It's also going to influence you when you start looking for what we call look development. Look development is, I like that color scheme, I'm going to use that color scheme because they had an interior designer put it together, and I want that color scheme and look in my interior scene. Okay, so you go and you find images for stuff you like. That's look development. It's different than looking for actual textures that you're going to then use on your materials and on your geometry. Okay, today we're going to be using another feature inside the render stack. This feature is called Adjust Final Gather Color Effects. Adjust Final Gather Color Effects basically will make the IBL broadcast more information for final gathering. It will actually make it brighter, make more color and value in it. So final gathering has more to work with. Now this is different than what we did last time. Remember, we had a visible IBL image in the window. We wanted to make it look brighter. That's what the environment color effects was. Today, final gathering, we're actually going to make it broadcast more power. Now, there are times when you use both of them. When you want to be able to see your IBL, maybe in a window, and you want to be able to make sure it's nice and bright, and you want all that power and energy from it as well in your scene, then you put both on. If you don't need both, you check on what you need. Why? What do you think happens when you put them both on? Takes a little bit longer to render, yeah. So you want to try to optimize it. Now, I have a JPEG for you guys in the download section of Project 4. It's basically this slide right here. What and when to adjust. Okay, color effects, or sorry, adjust environment color effects, if you want to make it look brighter. Final gather color effects, if you wanted to actually brighten your render when you hit the render button. It makes it brighter in your scene. Now, a lot of times you can use one or the other, and occasionally we use both. But it's knowing when to turn them on to be able to optimize your render. So download that. You can use it as reference. I'm also going to give you a very simple demo using a plane and a sphere that demonstrates exactly what this does. Okay, any questions so far? All right. No, not yet. Going to fire up Maya. First thing I'm going to do is show you how the final gather color effects works. So to do that, simple scene, plane and sphere. Anytime I create a plane and sphere, first thing I do is assign MIA material X to it. Why? Because I like my materials to be as accurate as possible. So what's a shortcut to assign a new material? Shift T. Remember, SAL is shifty. All right, so under mental ray, materials, MIA material X. If I want to take the reflectivity off, what do I do? Yeah, turn it to 0. Was not a quick trick question. There you go. Right. If I want to demonstrate IBLs, I need to create one. How do you do that? Render settings. Scene. Ooh, big giant button. Thank you. Right. I'm going to pull in the image that you guys used for the interior. So my DH201LP. LP means it's a light probe, which what do I have to do now? Make it angular. Thank you. There we go. All right, so if I want to render this out, that'll work. And you saw I put on resolution gate. That way I can see exactly what my render is going to give me when I hit the render button. So if I render this out, default, I get that. Now, first thing you want to do is when you start a new scene, make sure you've turned off default lights. How do you do that?
Render settings common.
Render settings common. Down at the bottom, render options. There you go. All right, so I turn that out. Turned all my lights off. The only thing I see now is my HDR image in my IBL. Now, if I want to work with final gathering, obviously you have to turn it on. So under quality, indirect GI mode, we want final gathering. Hit the render button. All right. So that is what we get right out of the box. Now, if I want to adjust the exposure for my IBL, and I want to make it look either darker or brighter to the camera, what do I need to adjust? Okay, I heard some answers. Kind of very shy answers. Yes, we do. Where's it at? Well, close. Render stats. All right. So under render stats, we have adjust environment color effects. So if I want my IBL image to look brighter to the camera, I go under color gain, right? That's what you guys did. If I want it to be bright, if I want it to look brighter, I type in that number, I re-render, now it appears brighter to the camera. But did it actually do anything to my scene here? No. All right. So this is where the new control you guys are going to be using today comes in. What I'm going to do is keep image. I'm going to turn off adjust environment color effects and go down underneath of it and turn on adjust final gather color effects. Okay, environment makes it look brighter to the camera. Final gathering actually makes it brighter when you render. It's really not that hard, but it is confusing in the beginning. Use a cheat sheet if you have to. All right. Now, I turned up my environment color effects to 1.5 to make it look brighter to the scene. But final gathering did absolutely nothing. So what I'm going to do here is turn up my color gain exactly the same, 1.5, but this time I'm going to render, and now my image is not going to look brighter because I turned it off, but my environment is going to be brighter. Can you see this got brighter? Right here? Compare it with the original. Didn't get a whole lot brighter because I really didn't turn it up a lot, but it did get brighter. Now, remember, that doesn't make it look brighter, it actually makes it brighter. If I want both of them on, you need them in order to be able to have both look brighter and actually be brighter. Right, so now you get the look and the actual power at the same time. Right, so if I zoom in and I adjust my sphere, and I render it out, I'll put them both on for now. Okay, so I have both on. One thing you want to do is ask yourself, do I need both of them on in my render? No. Which one can I turn off? Yeah, the environment color effect. So let me turn that off. Keep image, re-render. I may or may not get an improvement in my render time, but it's always a good idea to turn off any unnecessary stuff. All right, so it's about the same time. But remember, this is a simple sphere on a plane with no lights, very simple geometry. All right, good. You guys think you have that down. All right, so you understand to actually have more energy and make it actually have a brighter render, that's adjust final gather color effects. Right, so here's the difference without it You save a second in render time. With it, it's brighter. All right, while I'm in Maya, let me give you a tour of the Hypershade. So we've got some videos in for you guys in the video playlist area. There's lynda.com. George Maestri does. I think George Maestri and somebody else, we found a couple videos, put them together. It's all about the Hypershade. They go into detail pretty well about it. The Hypershade, how many here have used Maya 2015? Anybody? All right, so for your old timers, there was not a Hypershade button. You had to go up into Windows, rendering editors, and then you had to go down to Hypershade. All right, so they finally came up with this button that is right next to the render settings. If you click that button, it will bring up the Hypershade. Now, the Hypershade was revamped mostly in Maya 2016. Anybody used it in 2015? This area here in the middle, which is called the node editor, did not exist. They had another window in there. It was called the work area, and it didn't give you nearly as much control as the node editor does now. Notice in the middle of the node editor, which is what this is, so the parts of the window that you should have when you open it up, and this is usually the default, is the browser area. Right? That gives you a series of tabs going across the top. It'll show you materials, it'll show you textures, utilities if you have any, rendering. It's usually render layers, any lights you've got in your scene, cameras, shading groups. All right, you've also got the create area. This allows you to create materials, nodes, utilities, things that you're going to attach. Brand new, material viewer. Material viewer acts like a little mini renderer. It will show you a preview of what you're doing to the material in real time. And then there's a property editor, which looks strangely like the attribute editor. In fact, it is the same thing, but with a different name to confuse you. One thing that I will warn you about with the property editor, occasionally you do not get all the nodes that you would normally have in the attribute editor. Right? This time it happens to show it. If you're in the Hypershade and your property editor all of a sudden stops displaying, or you don't have a scroll bar to go down, just go into the attribute editor and look there. All right, if you're not taking notes, please take notes, because this is stuff that's going to help you navigate around a lot quicker. All right, back to the node editor in the middle here. Notice in the center of the window it says press tab to create a node. So if you hit the tab button, it comes up with a little blinking cursor input. If anybody here has used any kind of node-based compositing system, this works almost identical to Nuke and Shake, where you can go in, you hit tab, and you can start typing. So if I want to create an MIA material X, I can start typing MIA. If you spell it right, it's got clairvoyance, and it'll come up and go, oh, do you mean all this stuff? And as you start to narrow your selection down, I can go, oh yeah, MIA material X. That's what I want. Now, I can hit enter, and it will create one for me. Out of the goodness of its heart. Now, when you create something in the node editor, it automatically, notice it drops it up top into the materials section in the browser. It also shows you the material viewer, what it looks like by default. And down here, underneath, the property editor for whatever you happen to have selected. Now, when you create a material, you automatically get this thing hooked up to it called a shading group. It's going to have the same name as the material you made, but it's going to have an SG after it in capital letters. Shading groups are the first line of defense when you hit the render button. The shading group's job is to provide the renderer with the type of material it is, what that material is assigned to, which geometry, how many lights are in your scene, do you have anything plugged into that material, any special render instructions, light linking. It sends all that information to the renderer. So every time you hit the render button, it goes into the hypershade and queries all the shading groups. It says, what are you, what are you, what are you, what are you, what are you? It gives them a report of everything that they're doing. We're not going to use it that much right up front, but knowing what shading groups do is important, and it's also going to be important if you ever decide to use what's called a displacement map. Have you guys heard of displacement maps? You probably made some in ZBrush, right? Okay, displacement maps in Maya get plugged into shading groups. And what they do is, when you hit the render button, the renderer goes in and says, shading group, what do you got for me? Shading group says, okay, before I say anything else or give you any other information, you're going to be displacing either the entire scene or parts of geometry. So it knows now that the renderer has to go in and it's got to retessellate. You guys know what tessellation is, right? Tessellation is, you guys normally model in quads, right? Tessellation turns your quads into triangles. If you want smooth quads, it may subdivide those quads into smaller quads or maybe even into more triangles. So everything at render time eventually gets converted into triangles because polygons are what? Triangles, right? That is the smallest unit that we can render in 3D space. Actually, it's 2D, but we take all those 2D polygons and we make them into 3D. So to get a nice smooth edge, when you guys hit the 3 key in modeling, you're actually creating a kind of quick smooth that Mental Ray knows what to do with. Right? It smooths out your edges a little bit, kind of interpolates between, holding edges to figure out what you want. All right, all that occurs also when you hit the render button. So it's not just preview, it occurs in real time when you render. Now, the material itself has most of the common inputs visible by default. And before I do any of these other windows, I may as well, since I'm in here, show you exactly how some of these buttons work. The important ones anyway. Right, so by default, when you create a material, you're going to get the material in the shading group. If you select the shading group, there are 3 buttons in the top left of the node editor. They are connection buttons. The button on the left, where it's got a square with an arrow pointing inward, that will show you anything that is plugged into your material. So if I click it, notice nothing. I don't have anything plugged into it. I didn't plug any textures. I didn't plug any normal maps or bump maps or spec maps or diffuse maps. Now, notice my shading group went away. It did not disappear. It didn't get deleted. It's simply hidden right now. The middle button, as the icon hopefully implies, is it will show you what's plugged into it and what the material is plugged into. So if you click on that, it will show you the shading group because the material is always going to be plugged into a shading group. And if you only want to see the shading group with the material, you can press the button on the right. For the most part, we usually wind up clicking the center button a lot because we want to see what's plugged into our material. We also want to make sure that our material is plugged into the shading group and all the necessary stuff in the shading group is plugged in as well. All right, now in the node editor, you can pan and you can zoom, obviously, but you can't orbit or rotate. It works just like a regular camera control. If you hold Option, you right click, you can zoom in, Option middle mouse, you can pan. You can also use the wheel if you want. But remember, the wheel is going to give you digital stops. It's going to have predefined steps. If you want a nice smooth zoom, then you want to get used to using the Option and the right mouse, so you can be more precise. All right, that said, if I want to clear out my node editor so I can graph something else, which is what you usually want to do, because if not, it's going to get messy in that window if you keep pulling stuff in and graphing it. They're going to start overlapping on each other and you're going to wind up separating it. Nah, forget that. You can clear the node editor. Now, next to the out connection button here, there looks like a little Subaru symbol. That will actually clear your graph here. Now, it did not, that's this button right here, it did not delete them. One word of warning, if you delete anything in the node editor, you delete it in the Hypershade and in Maya at the same time. So if you do that, hopefully you remember quick enough where you can Z back. All right, now if I want to get that back in here, that same network I was looking at, I can go up here and it was the second Material X I just made because there was one in the scene already. If I want to get this back down here, I can do it a couple ways. One, I can come up to the browser, find it, right click on it, and say Graph Network. And that will drop it down here. I'm going to clear it again. Another way I can do it is I can middle mouse drag it and drop it down here. But the downside of that is all I get is the material itself. If I want to view the shading group now, I have to click the output button to show me. Right, so these two buttons are various ways you can organize. Generally, you can add a selected node. You can remove nodes. If you want to remove a node, I'm going to show you guys when we actually get into making utilities and plugging stuff in. I'm going to show you how to delete them a little easier. All right, so there are these little stacking icons in the next subsection of the node editor. They will display how much information you see in the node editor for your material or utility or anything. By default, this is what you get right here, this little stack that looks like 3 hamburgers with a hole in them. All right, if you click on the first stack right here, all it's going to do is show you the node, nothing, no other information, that's it. If you click on the next set, it's going to show you the node, and it's also going to show you what's coming out of it. Right now, the only thing coming out of it is the message into the shading group that it's alive. The third button, this one shows you every possible thing that you can plug into the Material X. Generally, it looks like a freaking Christmas tree. Okay, you really don't need all that information, trust me. I mean, you're more than welcome if you like that, go for it. But personally, I'd rather see this because that's what I want to deal with. If you need more, by all means expand it, plug in what you want, disconnect what you don't, but try to go back to a more civilized view. You can also get some of that same kind of information, and a lot of that information is also available in the property editor and the attribute editor too. Right, now, I haven't done anything to the material yet, so it changes the material viewer. I want to go back up and show you the browser. So the browser up here, this is how you can organize the materials, the textures, utilities, lights, all kinds of stuff that you have in your scene. Unfortunately, in the browser and the node editor, you cannot do visual light linking. Like you can't see a light and see what it's plugged into and all the geometry. You still have to use the light linking, the relationship editor. But the one thing you can do here in the browser to make your life a little easier is change the size of the icons. Right? Because sometimes that's just way too small. Another thing you can do is if you really want to go back in time, if you're feeling like really retro, you can go and view everything by a list. That'll make you feel like right back in the 90s. All right, so this little button right here, that is list order. This little button right here, that is icon. You can also organize the icons alphabetically, which is what the browser set to do automatically. Okay, down here in the create area, notice on the left side under favorites, it's got everything that you've got loaded in. So it's got Maya, it's got Mental Ray. In 2017, if you've got Arnold loaded, it'll show you Arnold also. Whatever you have loaded, that Maya can use and that it understands as far as plugins go. If you want to narrow the selections on the right side, so this shows you everything that's there. Too much information. If you want to narrow it down on the left side under favorites, you want to go to Mental Ray and click materials, it will just show you Mental Ray materials. If you want to look at Maya materials, just click on that surface and it will show you just Maya materials. It will show you volumetric effects, displacements, 2D textures, 3D textures, environments. Other textures, we'll get into layer texturing. All right, so it makes life much easier. Okay, on the right side here, material viewer. So if I change my material in any way down here under the property editor, if I change the color of my material, it will automatically update and redraw in the material viewer. Now the material viewer, as long as you have Mental Ray loaded, on the left side, you can load that in as the renderer. By default, you'll probably get something like Maya hardware, which looks like that. Doesn't show you an environment. It doesn't really show you an accurate representation of the material itself. Just shows you what it might look like if you were using Viewport 2.0. Now, the material viewer by default gives you something called a shader ball, which is compound curvature, very complex surface. Unfortunately, complex surfaces usually take longer to render, so the material viewer takes longer to update. You also have other shapes. You can go cloth, which kind of looks like a cloth sim. You guys did a little N-cloth simulation modeling? No? Because they used to show it to you how to make tablecloth. Just get a poly plane. You have your table underneath. You make one of them an emitter, or one of them a collision, one of them an N-cloth object, and you run the simulation and the cloth drops down because of gravity, and then it starts to drape around the surface. What? No? Okay. remind me, I'll show you guys Lecture 11. Because Lecture 11 is kind of like a potpourri of stuff that is nice to know, but we don't have time, or you may not use it immediately. So think of stuff that you want to see. If I can do it, I'll show you. If not, I'll show you. I'll tell you where to go to find out how to do it. But there's a lot of cool stuff you can do. In fact, why would you ever want to model a tablecloth when you can simulate it? Once the simulation is done, you freeze it, delete the simulation, it locks the geometry in, done. In fact, they used to show you could make like, you could do simulations with pillows and chairs and stuff, like have like a sphere settle into a cushion so you get like butt imprint and head imprint on pillows. A lot of cool stuff. Anyway, I digress, sorry. All right, so teapot just gives you different shapes. Ocean, lots of splashes. Really good if you're trying to do, water sims. Glass, more splashes. Personally, I like the sphere. Why? Because it's simple, it's quick, and it'll show me what I want. You can also change what kind of environment it's showing you a preview of. You got interior color. Neutral means it's black and white. So this is warm. The other interior is going to be cooler looking. Same thing with exterior. You got kind of a warm one. You got a nice cool one. Or actually, this is warm. The other one was cool. Now, the thing about the Hypershade is all the windows are dockable except for the node editor. What that means is you can grab the title bar for the browser and pull it out. Now it's free floating. If you want to get it back in, you can try to try to move it so the Hypershade will move it over and try, or you can just it worked. Figures when I want it to. Now, but what you can do is just double click, it'll put itself away. Maybe not exactly where you want it. Notice it doesn't go across the top like I had it before. So, you can argue with it. There you go. You can also remove any window except the node editor by closing it. Now, the one thing that I've always said to Autodesk that would be great is to be able to go back to window and have a reset button so it would put all the windows back in. They never applied though. So once you take them out, they're out until you put them back in. So you go up to Window inside the Hypershade, go to Browser. I can double click, should put itself away. If I go to Property Viewer or Property Editor, no, I don't like you there. I could double click, it put itself away somewhere. It decided to dock with everything. Notice the node editor is hiding. It's very shy. Right, so you can go back in, put the other windows back in, double click on them. Create, I definitely want that in there. Right, so everybody put itself away more or less. The only thing I didn't put back in, I think, was the material viewer. Oh no, there it is. And where is my property? There it is. So, yeah. Tends to be a little weird. Unless you really like driving yourself crazy, mess with it at your own peril. You can rearrange the windows if you find it's annoying. Like I said, property editor, if it fails, just go over to the attribute editor. You can do the same things. All right, so that's an overview of the material and property editor, the node editor, the create area, the browser, the hypershade in general. When we start working on materials, I'm going to show you guys how you can export your materials from the day scene so you can import them into the night scene and apply them to your surfaces. Again, just a reminder, don't forget that the interior scene, day and night, we're going to be using on Monday for materials. The exterior scene, day and night, we're also going to be using on Monday for materials too. You guys are going to start to add materials to those four scenes. All right, materials, like I said, it's going to be a couple of days of lecture and a couple of labs to work on them. Then we get into texturing. When we get into texturing on next Friday, that's when you guys decide which scene out of the four you want to work on. You want to work on the interior day or the interior night, the exterior day or the exterior night. You choose one, take it through all the way to the end, adding everything to it that we teach you guys. All right, any questions so far? All right, so today's assignment. Let's take a look at all the goodness that is available for you. All right, so some reading. Back to Jeremy Byrne's book, good stuff. If you read nothing else from Jeremy Byrne, read The Art and Science of Color. He has tables in there with RGB values for light at different times of the day, different environmental conditions. He's got different what we call color temperatures. Color is actually measured in kelvins, which is a temperature. All right, so he's got that information in there, plus what the RGB values are. So it's a really, really good theoretical background for you to have. Plus, you can try out the colors that he's suggesting for sky, for interior light, depending on the type of bulb it is, exterior, depending on the time of day, the time of year. It's good stuff. Okay, resources. This is where you guys are going to go to get your free HDRI images. It's called VizPeople. VizPeople.com. And in particular, I gave you a link to free stuff. Why? Because free stuff is great. Now, these things are all free to download. You don't even have to make an account. The one thing I will say is the HDRI images are actually quite good. Remember, a lot of times, if it's free, how much did you pay for it? So your expectation should be for free? Zero. This is actually like an 8 out of 10 in expectations for the HDR images. They're good. There's a set of 10 that you can download for free. Now, there are also some free models of varying quality. There is also something I will suggest you download either now or think about downloading later, are free floor textures. Why? Because you can never have too many textures that are free. Especially legally free. The only thing they ask is if you start making money, they want credit and they also want a cut of it. So there is a commercial license available if you decide to use it commercially. If you guys do freelance work and you're going to get paid for it, make sure when you quote your client a price that you include any materials you need to buy legally. Because the last thing you want to have is somebody chase you down saying use my image without authorization, here's a cease and desist letter, and here's a lawsuit. Much easier to say, hey, want to use your image, what do you charge for it? Find out. Charge your client. All right, so back to HDR images. When you click on it, it will take you to free HDRI images updated. Now notice down here underneath there are two sites that you can download from. Mirror 1, Mirror 2. Who's the fairest of them all? How do you know which one to use? Try 1. If the download time is obscene, try 2. It simply means they've got two sites that contain the same information in different locations, so that if bandwidth is an issue on one, you may be able to get through on the other. 2 months ago, we had a student try to download off of Mirror 1. It said it was going to take 10 hours and 36 minutes. So they were waiting, and I said, well, why don't you cancel and try 2? They did, and it was 3 minutes. So if you get a horrible download, go to the other site. Okay, with that said, you get 10 high-resolution images. And what it looks like is something like, HDR, here we go. Looks something like this. You'll get a folder. You'll have a folder full of HDR images, and these are big. These are 55, 60 megabytes each. They're not the little piddly ones that we give you. These are full-blown high dynamic range. You've also got another folder there called PNG. PNG are how you can view them to decide which one you're going to use. You've also got a PDF catalog, the license agreement saying you can use it. If you make money, I want some. Fair enough, right? You guys are learning. It's nice to be able to have resources that you can use non-commercially. Now, what we are going to use for the nighttime version of the exterior scene is going to be number 10. Now, number 10 may not look like nighttime, but it is. It's actually sun going down, moon coming up. This is just preview. It's not the actual size, and you can see all the banding from the crappy projector. All right. This is going to get mapped into your IBL spherically. This is why spherical is in there as an option. All right? This is sunset here in the middle. The edges represent, for us, probably the eastern sky, right? Because the sun is going to set in which direction? West, for us in this hemisphere. All right. This little white dot over here, like 5 or 6 pixels, that is your moon. So when you map it in, what we are going to do is try to angle the moon so it is behind the camera. And a rough position doesn't have to be accurate. It's not going to matter until we start assigning materials in your scene and we can see the moon in reflection. Then we'll try and tweak it and assign it a little bit better. But this is the image we're going to be using. Okay, that info is here. Okay, daytime. The daytime, we give you an HDR image. All right, so for daytime, we provide you with this image, which may or may not preview. There it is. All right, so it's kind of like a little villa, like European villa, cobblestone, shops on either side. So your environment is actually an exterior cafe. So this is your daytime. Your nighttime is going to be the Viz people, number 10. And that information is right here in case you forget. Please read the directions. Here's one thing that you are definitely all going to want to know. When you download the Viz people, the file format that you get the compressed folder in is an RAR, a RAR format. Okay, it's an older format, a little bit older than zip, but you need a special expander. At least on the Mac side you do. On the PC side, zip up or zip pin, any unzipped utility you'll probably be able to do it. But on the Mac side, we need the RAR expander. Everybody hear that? Somebody's going to come up in lab and go, I can't expand this. I know. Don't be that person. Right, so what you guys need to do is search for RAR expander. It's quite a difficult thing to do. You have to type in RAR expander. Oh, RAR expander, the first one that comes up for Mac OS. Look, that's what you want. Go to downloads. It says click here to download the current beta version. That's what you want to do. Why? Because they update the thing almost every month. Right. Wait a second. Don't click on any of this crap down here.
You unmuted your mic. Whoa.
No, my mic is muted. In fact, everybody's mic is muted, but if you're recording on your device. All right, so we're good now, right? The ghost in the machine is gone? Good. All right. So, wait for it to expand. Don't click on any of the advertising. Right now it says V085. So I'm going to save it. Why? Because last month they had a new version and I want to update. So when you get the RAR expander, it'll show up in your downloads. Here's the thing. Sometimes when you double click on it, you may get a warning that it won't unzip unless you right click on it and open it that way. Occasionally Apple does that. Right? So in this case, I'm getting an open button. But if you guys ever download anything and you double click on it and it won't open, try right clicking and go open. And that will bypass some of the Mac OS security because it doesn't like anything downloaded that hasn't been downloaded from the Apple Store. All right, so I'm going to drop this into my application, see if it updates. Yep, I'm going to replace it with the one I got in there. All right, so how do you work the RAR expander? It's not rocket science. Go into applications, open it up. And run it. You can also drop your file on top of it if you need to. And you can also right click on your file and open with once you have it installed. Right, so any questions about the RAR expander? So you'll need that for the Viz people stuff. And actually, only for the HDRs, I think the floor comes in as a zip. Depends on who's providing them the free stuff. Okay, any questions so far? All right, let me set my project, give you guys a quick tour of what you're going to be working on. There are two scene files. One is the daytime. It's going to come in wireframe. If you want to work on it in perspective and render from the render cam, that's fine. It's a little easier to move the light around if you need to. The other scene, the nighttime, different geometry, different composition to account for the candles. Okay, so there's a good example of a cloth sim right there. A little rough, but works. All right, so let's kind of talk through the daytime lighting. That's the simplest one. That's the one you want to work on first. Right? First thing you want to do, open it up, save as, daytime. Create an IBL. Into the IBL, you're going to put the H211LP. That's the one we provide, the HDRI image, into the IBL. We give you lighting breakdowns for each one. So there's a reference there for IBL final gathering only. Then there's one for IBL final gathering and the sun, the directional light. Once you get those two, that's 85 to 89% of what you need to do. Right? The other 10, 11% is going to be adjusting the final gather color effects to make the whole thing brighter. To account for all the light that's coming in from the sky, all the light that's coming in from the sun. And that's it. One single light, image-based lighting other than that. Okay, here's your references. This is daytime. So this is your first reference. They are not in order. That is just IBL final gathering. The next one is going to be IBL final gathering and sun. Then the last one is IBL final gathering, sun, and adjusting the final gather color effects to kind of warm up or cool off the sun a little bit, create a more neutral looking light, and also to get more energy in it. Right, also a couple of quick screenshots for you for placement guides so you can see more or less where the sun is. You should be able to figure that out based on the individual reference. Remember, light direction, you guys matched them up fairly well in Project 2. Same kind of deal here. Same thing you did with Project 3, Project 4. Now, the nighttime, more lights. So we've got final gather and an IBL turned on. It's really dark looking, but there is a little bit of information. Why is it dark? Because it's a nighttime HDR image. You're not going to get that much from final gathering. We are going to add moonlight. So the moonlight's going to play Not that big of a deal because moonlight in general, depending on how cloudy it is, how the camera is set up. Right, so we're getting a little bit of light from the moon. The next step is final gathering and adjusting final gather color effects to boost it a little bit. Not much, a little bit. Then we're adding point lights in. Point lights are going to be the lion's share of the lighting. The position for each one, once you figure out where it's placed, the intensity, the shadow quality, all of that is going to be the same for all the point lights, right? All the LEDs in the candles should more or less all be the same. Same color, same intensity. When you're all done, then you can add in surface shaders if you want. Just like we had you guys do with the bulbs for the nighttime. You guys remember that, right? Okay. Remember, it's self-illuminating. Put on a little bit of shader glow, make the color white, the outglow color white. Just a little bit to create a little bit of bloom there. All right, as far as the templates go, it is one big giant template, just like the interior was. Daytime goes on the left, nighttime goes on the right. Okay, as far as daytime goes, first thing you want to do is save as. Next, create an IBL. Inside that IBL, you're going to put in your HDR image that we supplied, DH211. DH211LP stands for light probe, so what do I need to do? Angular mapping, thank you. That fixes it. Now, if you can't stand that grainy look and it just looks too terrible, you can change your renderer in the viewport to viewport 2.0. Makes it look much prettier. Not really necessary because this image is not visible in the render cam. All right, so I've got my IBL in there. I've got an image in the IBL. Next thing I want to do, turn on final gathering. Right? Under quality in your render settings, if you want quick feedback, what do? What are we turning down though? Yes, indirect diffuse quality. Thank you. 0.25, that'll knock down the final gathering settings. Make the render a little quicker. Right click in the render view on the first button, render from the render cam. Now the overall quality is going to be low because, I want quick feedback. Now you might notice some artifacting here. That is from final gathering having really low settings. What I want to do is make sure that I'm getting the same information that's in the reference. Load your reference in. All right, so there's the IBL. Let me get rid of all this other stuff here so we're not confused by it. I'm going to re-render again. compare my results. All right, other than artifacting and noise that I have, that's about what I need from my IBL. That part's done. So next, you want to load in the next, which is going to be the IBL and the sun. So now your mission is to create the sun. Directional light. Remember, it's going to drop in at the center of the world. You have to move it up. Personally, I kind of like to put it near where I can see it and work with it a little quicker. So, which direction should my sun be coming from? On the right side? So my sun should be over here? Left side. Yep, left side facing the table. Also, it corresponds with where the sun is in our IBL. So what I'm going to do is orbit the sun around. And you want to line up your shadows with the reference. Compositionally, we want to be able to see this entire wine glass shape next to the cheese. Make sure you keep image if you haven't done so already and re-render. So go for light position first, right? Then go for shadow quality. Then go for light intensity, light color. All right, so it doesn't look anything like my reference because, no, I want to have the IBL on all the time. Yeah, I need to angle it down. Right now, the sun is setting in the sky. So I want to bring it down. Grab it, aim it more towards the floor and the table, and then start working on the orbit and the height. All right, so I actually got lucky. At least the orbit part looks right, but my shadows are too long. So to fix that, I'm going to bring my light up a little. And what you can do while you're working to get even quicker feedback instead of rendering your entire scene, what can you do? Yep, you can do a marquee select. You can either set up IBL or IPR for that, or just marquee select an area and let it render. You want to do the light position, which is your shadow position first. Work on your shadow quality, which is going to be how soft is your shadow. Work on intensity, then light color. Light intensity, light color are going to kind of work a little hand in hand, but you want to at least get the intensity in the ballpark before you change the color of the light. All right, this is taking too long. I'm bored. So what I'm going to do is just manually select it and hit the render button. IPR seems to be too dramatic right now. Takes too long to update. There we go. Bring it down a little more. Render out that piece. Once you start to be able to see the entire wine glass shadow, compare it with your render. Not bad. It looks like it's shifting just a little. Looks like my shadows are aimed more towards the back wall just a little bit. So in that case, I probably want to bring it around just a little. If you find even nudging it a little bit with the rotation tool is too much, go into the channel box and try manually plugging in small numbers into the rotation. Okay, that one looks pretty close. If yours is that close, call that done. All right, now generally what I want to do is work on my shadow softness. Shadow softness control for directional light is what? Light angle. You're not sure? Start with 1, go to 2, go to 4. Whatever you think it'll take. The numbers for light angle are going to be bigger than for the point light and the spotlight. Light radius is a little more sensitive. Now at this point, you say, well, there's so much noise in it, I can't really tell. Are my shadows soft enough? This is where you might need to go in and crank up your quality. I usually like to start at 1. I might even go to 2 just to see if my shadows are soft or am I looking at artifacting. Okay, that looks like it'll work okay. Turn that off. All right, next. Let's try and go for light intensity. Need to be brighter or darker? Brighter, if you're not sure. How bright? Double it. Render it, see what it looks like. If it's too bright, knock it down. Yeah, you can tell right away. Too bright. Yes, definitely. All right, so I'm going to knock that down in half. That's usually what I do. Then if it's still too bright, I'll knock it down in a little bit at a time. If it's close and you're not sure, then try adjusting the light color. Hard to tell. So what I'm going to do is, what color is my sun in the reference? Kind of yellowish. Remember, it's going to look gray and muddy because we're on gray, muddy, diffuse material. We're basically on clay. So a couple things you can do. You can guesstimate the color. You can also try color picking. And I would suggest that you go to a nice bright area that's fairly neutral. But you can see it looks very gray here. All right, so I'm just going to pick this area. Click in here and go, oh my gosh, it's green. That won't work. So if that happens, you're probably better off guesstimating. Right, get the hue right. You can pretty much guess it's not going to be a green sun. You want your light to be closer to orange than you do green for golden sunlight. Generally, keep your value all the way up. Take your saturation. Good starting point for saturation is around 0.2. Anything higher and it will start to become very cartoony. You're not sure? Render it out, see how it looks. Color's not too bad. Intensity's not too bad. You can see artifacting in the back here. That's final gathering. That will get cleaned up. All right, close enough. Now what I'm going to work on is adjusting my final gather color effect. So wow, you might say to yourself, well, isn't that just the sun getting brighter? No, actually, we want more energy from the sky, from our image. All right, for anybody who took notes or downloaded the JPEG, where do I go to adjust final gather color effects? Render stats of IBL. Thank you. So render stats, IBL, down here, adjust final gather color effects. Why are I not adjusting environment? Yeah, it won't affect anything because I can't see the image directly. I mean, if you turn it on, nothing bad will happen, just that you may increase the render time for no value. Now, if I want to make this appear brighter, what do I need to adjust?
Environmental color effects.
All right, so, no, remember I'm still in Final Gather Color Effects. Color gain. If you're not sure, double it. That will take you into the super whites. Make sure you keep image and compare your render. If it's too bright, knock it down a little bit. Not bright enough, give it more high value. So you notice it kind of cools off the sunlight quite quickly. And when you're all done, crank up your quality. I'll put my overall quality at 2. Remember, final gathering, indirect diffuse, 1 should be sufficient for us. We have fairly small scenes. Now I may have to adjust my overall quality, but I can at least get an idea of how it's going to look. And then I can start to go in and adjust, higher settings if I need them. All right, so pretty close. All right, so nighttime. Nighttime, you're going to start off the same way. First thing you're going to do, create an IBL. Go under Scene, create IBL. Next thing you're going to do, make sure you've downloaded the Viz people. After you're sure you've downloaded the Viz people, you've got all 10 images, you're going to choose number 10, and you're going to copy number 10, the HDR, into your source images. Why do you want to do that? So it stays there. If you need to take this project to another Mac, or you need to, something happens to yours and you've got it backed up, as long as you set your project to this folder, you've got your image in source images. When you open it up, it should link up automatically. That's the beauty of using a project, setting your project, and having all of your images and files in the right folders. So copy it, drop it in. Now, once you've got everything in that you need, you're going to bring in your Viz People image. Now this is going to take a little longer to load than our puny little ones. And again, if you have any doubts, this was a square and rectangular image. So notice it comes in perfect. There's the moon. But if you want a little better resolution, in the viewport, change the renderer to viewport 2.0. And now you can actually make out what's going on. Okay, this part is just a little bit unusual from what we've been doing now. You'll notice that the sunset is behind the camera. That is going to create unnecessary light we don't want. Unnecessary final gather effects. So what we're going to do is rotate the IBL in the y-axis around to put the sunset behind the wall and the moon behind the camera. Just a rough position. You only need to rotate it in the one axis. All right, so all I have to do is select it, hit E. Now notice that this is just like a Hollywood set. We did not model anything that is not seen by the camera. So just rotate put the sun behind the wall, the sunset behind the wall, and put the moon more or less behind the camera. Doesn't have to be exact. That is good enough. Like I said, doesn't have to be exact for now. First thing you want to do is load your reference in. It's going to be the IBL by itself. Keep image. I'm going to check my render settings. One thing I forgot to do is what? Save, yes. That's a big one. Save as. What else did I forget to do? Was it? Yep, turn off default light. Very good, thank you. Oh, it's off. You're welcome. Now what? There's one other thing I forgot to do. Yes, turn on Final Gathering. If I don't turn on Final Gathering, that IBL is not going to do anything. Don't turn on Prototype GI either, or it will take 6 times longer to render. All right, I'm also going to knock down my indirect diffuse quality because I don't want to wait. And I'm going to hit render. Now, if you've placed your moon behind the camera, that's a good example of what did I forget to do. Select the right camera. That's why never believe what Maya says. You could be in the right camera, you could be in the wrong camera. Always tell Maya where you want to render from. Maya responds much nicer if you're nice to it. Bring it flowers, chocolates, send it greeting cards, whatever it takes to make Maya happy. Yeah. All right, now, notice I've got a little bit, it's hard to see, but I've got a little bit of Final Gather happening in there. Can you guys see that? Now, if you notice that the reference is a little bit lighter on the side, and this is very important, very important, everybody. If it shifts a little bit, if it looks a little brighter in the reference, that is okay. Why? Because the moon placement is not critical at this stage. So notice that my reference is a little brighter on the right side. That means that my moon position is probably somewhere different than where you put yours. As long as the moon is behind the camera, you're fine. Okay, so this, just make sure it's working. Make sure you've got your image in and it looks like this. Don't stress over, oh my God, it's just a little bit brighter. No, forget that. Move on to the next part. Next part is the moon. All right, so the moon. Which direction is the moon? The moon is everywhere. It's like Elvis. So, but in reality, in our image, where's the moon? Behind the camera. So that's a good place where you want to put the moon. What are we going to use for the moon? Directional light. Why? Because the moon is a small pseudo light source. It's really our big bounce card in the sky. Right? But you can tell right here, the shadow from the cup on the wine bottle. Use that as your guide for placement of the moon. You're going to do the same thing with that you did with the sun. Except the moon is going to be a little bit cooler. To begin with, you can keep the light neutral, keep it white, keep the intensity down. Match this up as best you can. Does that make sense? Any questions on that part? Okay. I don't believe you, but okay. Right, next part, you're going to crank up adjust final gather color effects. Why? Because we want the moon, the sky, to pump in a little more energy. Just like we did with the other one. And the last part, before you start playing around with surface shaders, is put the point lights in. You're going to have to use what to make sure the point lights are not buried in geometry? Light linking. It's going to be exactly the same kind of light linking you did for the interior. You're going to be placing the point light inside the bulb geometry for the flame. You're going to unlink it only from that geometry. And then at the end, you can play. You can surface shader yourself. Right. Any questions? Anything? Not sure of?
This is going to be uploaded into our lesson, the artists, or no?
Yes. I'm archiving it. Just like all the other lectures. So as soon as we're done here, when you guys go to lunch, I save it out, I render it, I upload it. It should be up there before the end of the night. Okay, no questions? Then go to lunch, go to dinner, whatever you want to call it.